My sister Jenny and I were very, very close when we were younger. We were about 1.5 years apart. When we were going to elementary school, we would strap on our skates, and our dog Freckles, he was a big Dalmatian dog, big fat one. He would pull us on the sidewalks of the school, and that was one of my fondest memories of her. We were always together. We were very, very tight. When I was 11 and my sister was 9.5, my mom separated from my dad and we moved from California to Maryland. I was not getting along with my mom all that well. And so I moved back to California to live with my dad. My sister and I would keep in contact, phone calls and letters. That's when she met Michael. She was very young. She wasn't but 14 years old or so. The first time I met Michael, I have to say, there was something about him inside that I just didn't quite like, and I could never put my finger on it. He had an immaturity about him, being very boastful. When you meet these people that are just all into themselves, like they're the greatest person in the world and the entire world revolves around them, that was Michael. But I believe that he filled a hole in her life that she was really yearning for. She was in love with him and she appeared to be very happy. Jenny eloped with Michael when she was about 15, 16 years old. She had told me that she was pregnant, and my mom was definitely not happy with the situation, but she accepted the situation. And at that point, Jenny went to live with his parents down in Virginia. I met his dad a couple times. He was very gruff. He was a very stern father. And his mother, she was very dutiful, making sure that the dinner's on the table every night, making sure that everything's clean, the dishes are washed. Jenny seemed right at home. She built a life with him. They would go camping, they would go places together. They were a young couple, striking out against the world. And it at least appeared from the outside that they were a happy couple. About 10 years later, Melissa came along. And now with 2 children, the financial strain on the family, of course, it grows.
My mom worked a lot of odd jobs. She worked at a pizza place, she worked at a Mexican restaurant, and she ended up following in my grandmother's footsteps, and she worked in hospice care and took care of people.
She kept her nose to the grindstone. She worked on her schooling and she got her RN license. She was very much into the nursing field. Michael never held down a job for very long. Every time I talked to my sister, she was telling me that, oh yeah, Michael got fired from another job or he quit this job. And so my sister had to financially support the family, and it was a constant struggle for her.
She would also do as many odd jobs as she could. She would do people's taxes, and she sold Avon to try to keep money coming into the house. My father retired very young. He worked as a maintenance man at a popular hotel chain, and he said he dropped a bird bath on his foot. I never saw him limping or anything, but that's the reason he said he was retiring. After my father retired, he really became a recluse. He would just hide in his garage and just scroll eBay. He would buy all these collectible Tupperwares from the 70s. He would buy Beatles bobbleheads and records, and he would never listen to them. He would never use these things. He had multiple guitars and this giant firearm collection. He just wouldn't share a common space at all with anyone. He wouldn't even eat dinner at the same time as us. He would just look at eBay all day, all night. That's all he did.
He just spent. It was like he was just buying just to buy. I started to see that maybe it was because he needed control over it. As a child with his father, he was actually controlled. However, the spending was something where he was in control. He hadn't worked in years. He wasn't supporting the family like a mature man and husband should do. You take away the self-worth of a person, it's hard to be able to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And I believe because of that controlling nature that was placed upon him, he ended up doing the same because that's what he felt comfortable with. That was his life. My husband and I decided that we'd had enough of California, and so we decided to move back to Maryland. And so my sister Jenny offered to go ahead and let us move in. In that month that I was there, I would hear the arguments. I would hear mainly Michael yelling at her, and my sister would be just trying to appease him. And I witnessed that on many, many occasions, pretty much almost on a nightly basis. Any respect that I really had for Michael dissipated very quickly at that point. I'll just be honest with you, I was thinking that Michael was a bum.
I never really saw the love between my parents. He didn't show her kindness or anything. He just continued to do nothing but abuse her. My father would do all of these disrespectful things. He would shove her against the wall or hip check her and call her the N-word. And he would belittle her any chance he got.
Her and I discussed the relationship just very briefly, but she really didn't want to talk about it. I knew my sister was in trouble, but I really didn't know how bad things were.
I was 4 years old. And I remember chaotic screaming. He took the back of my sister's neck and slammed her against the bed frame in our room. My mother was sitting on the stairs, holding my sister's head together. All I remember was her saying, "It's okay, honey, just take calm, while we waited for the EMTs. I don't know if my mom didn't report him to the police because she was scared that we would end up on the street, or she really thought that all relationships were this way. My sister and I didn't know anything else, so of course we thought this sort of behavior was normal. When my sister turned 16, she got married and moved out. I feared my father. I remember I climbed onto the roof of our home because he was afraid of heights and I knew he wouldn't follow me. Little things would set him off. Would always tense up and you could never tell what he was thinking. And then he would just go for you. The first time my father threw me out of the house, I was 14 years old and it was snowing. It became a rather common occurrence for him to throw me out. It was always over something stupid. I would have to go find a couch or a friend to stay with. Really, around the age of 15 on, I was no longer in the home. I would always ask my mother, "Why do you let this happen to me?" And she would go, "Oh, honey, I can only control myself." We just lived in fear and just tiptoed and walked on eggshells, and he just did whatever he wanted.
Jenny would never really open up to me. She may have been embarrassed to say that, hey, things aren't hunky-dory here in paradise anymore. I, to this day, do not really know exactly why she stayed with him. I believe that she didn't want to throw away what she had built with her family. My mom was living in Edgewater, Maryland. She had been in a car accident, and she'd been having some really bad trouble with her ankle. And so my sister said, well, I'm going to go ahead and bring her to my home here in Virginia. She put her in a spare room that they had, but then they decided that they would do an addition onto the home with a living room and a room for my mom to live in, her own bathroom. My mom got right around $150,000 for the sale of her house, and $72,000 went into the remodel of the home. My mom would break me fairly often. She asked me point blank, why are they still charging me $2,500 a month to live here when I paid for doing this addition for my own room? At that point, I felt very helpless. This should not be. Why is she getting charged any money? Other than maybe food. And Jenny's reply back to me was that, I know, Susie, I know. I realized that she was completely powerless to do anything. I could tell she felt horrible about it, but she had no choice.
My father's spending was out of control. The money had to come from somewhere. I know they were refinancing multiple times as well, just to try to keep it going. My mom just didn't have a say in that house at all.
My mom was now being taken advantage of. My sister, by far, had been being taken advantage of. She needed to get away. My mom needed to get away, but there was no place for either of them to go. It's a horrible feeling knowing that somebody is in a situation that they can't get out of and you can't help them.
I told her, "Mom, this isn't normal. Mom, he's abusing you." And I was giving her examples. And that's when she really kind of started to slowly think of the idea of trying to escape.
All of a sudden, out of the blue, get a phone call from Michael saying, yeah, Jenny left me. Do you know where she is? If I'd known what the end result would have been, I certainly would have done something.
The first time my mom thought about leaving was in 2014. She had realized that she was in a loveless marriage, and she had started to see how bad the abuse really was. One day she left work. She didn't tell him that she had put in her 2 weeks' notice, and she drove straight from her job to my house. And I was thrilled.
I had no idea she had even left him. But I received a phone call from Michael, and he was very, very upset. And he was imploring me if I knew where Jenny was. He was very emphatic. He wanted to know where she was. I immediately called my sister. She told me that he had taken a gun and he had pointed it to her head. And he had told her, "If you ever leave me, I will kill you."
That was the turning point.
When she told me that, I knew who he was. And I knew what situation she was in. And so I asked my sister, well, what about Mother? Because now my mom was still in the home with him and his mother, and Jenny's not there. And she replied, "I know." And still to this day, I feel a little bit guilty because I asked her, what about Mother? And I believe she felt a responsibility to our mom, and that's probably one of the main reasons why she went back.
My father was just calling and messaging and leaving all these voicemails. I think it was just so overwhelming.
You have 8 new messages.
That she decided to give it a try again. We walked on the beach, and she just cried, but she put on a brave face. And I still have that picture of her by the ocean, smiling, but there's a sadness, too. I knew she was afraid of what was going to happen when she got there.
She wasn't his wife. She was a possession. And he was not going to let anybody or anything take his possession away from him.
Soon after she got home, maybe a few days or a week, she called me and told me that things were better, things were doing good. He promised her that he would get a control on his spending. They came up with this idea that they were going to bring patients to the home, and then she wouldn't have to go somewhere to work anymore, and that she wouldn't have to work as hard.
Michael's father passed away, and now there was an empty room, and so they decided to go ahead and get a business license and open the home for elderly patients, receiving a monthly check for doing so. They called their home the Heflin home, and it started with my mom and 2 others, and then when my mom passed away, then she was taking care of 3 elderly folks. In early 2016, my current husband and I took a trip out there for a couple days. I noticed that there were a bunch of cameras up around inside the home, and I asked my sister what they were for. And she had told me that if an elderly person fell, sometimes they might not even know how they fell. And so having a camera system was just good insurance. But they didn't have any downstairs, which is where her and Michael lived, because they never had any elderly down there.
There were 16 cameras around the house, but the 4 main ones pointed into the kitchen, the residential living room, outside, and the storage area that used to be the carport. And that was right outside of my father's garage. My mom's day would start very, very early, sometimes as early as like 4:30 in the morning.
She would start her mornings by getting everybody up, washing them, feeding them. She would take them to doctor's appointments, and she would care for them all the way through the day.
She didn't get very much time to herself at all.
When my sister had 3 residents in the home, she was pulling down about $11,000 a month. And the only expenses they had, of course, was the mortgage and utilities and food. But there was one person in the equation that was going to upset everything that she had worked for.
About 2 months in, he started spending again.
Brand new Bowflex machine, brand new exercise bike. There was all this ham radio equipment. I know that stuff's not cheap. And there was a tremendous gun collection. You can see where the money was being spent, and it wasn't on her.
All the promises that he had made, he went back on. My mom was exhausted from working all the time, and things were worse than ever.
There was one time that we were just walking around Winchester, and then my sister got a phone call, and it was Michael. And he was telling her, "You need to get home. You need to get home right away." We had only been gone for like 20, 30 minutes. And then she looked at me and she said, "I'm sorry, I have to go home." My sister was under his total control. When Jenny came to the realization that things were not going to get better, she decided she was going to leave Michael.
So one day she was delivering Avon, and I think she had let slip that things were not as it seemed at home. And this absolutely shocked her customer, and they really wanted to help her. So they put her in touch with a realtor out in California. She contacted this realtor. She told him what the situation was, that she was trying to get out, trying to escape. And the realtor said that he might have a room for rent in his own home. He was like, "I would love to have a feminine touch around here." He said that he was widowed. And it wasn't so much flirting, but it was a kindness that she really was not used to. So she had a place to go. She started packing. It's not like my father even noticed. He didn't notice. Half her clothes were packed up and mailed to my house.
She finally came to the realization that this is over.
I remember the day she was going to leave very clearly. I couldn't get a hold of my mom. I figured she left her phone downstairs and was caring for a patient. And then I got a call from her. She frantically whispered into the phone, "Melissa, he found out that I'm leaving. I need to leave now." And I was offering to come and get her, but she didn't want to put me in danger. And then she said, "Oh no, he's back. I've got to go." And she hung up.
Sutter County 911.
Ma'am, could you send an ambulance and a police car to 215 Stafford Drive? There's been a shooting.
215 Stafford Drive.
Yes, ma'am.
Who's been shot?
Me and my wife got in a terrible argument. I caught her in an affair, and I just shot her, and I swear to God I didn't mean to do that.
Where is she right now?
laying in the bathtub. What I'm going to do is this. I've got to put my belt on, the rest of my clothes on, and put my shoes and socks on, and be out front. I'm going to have my hands in the air, tell the officers.
Yeah, I understand. Is she awake?
Yeah, she's a gurgling in there. She's breathing. If the ambulance gets here quick, she might be phased.
Okay, are you... Okay, where's the gun?
I have laid it on the floor. I'm going to be waiting for the police out in front.
Okay.
Thank you.
I received a call from my lieutenant. He advised that a female was shot by her husband. Deputies responded to the scene. Mr. Heflin was detained without any issues. They located Mrs. Heflin in a bathtub. She sustained a gunshot wound. She was taken to the Winchester Medical Center, and then from there, they flew her to a Nova hospital.
I was scrolling on the local radio chatter page, 200 block Stafford Drive, man shoots wife. I was dizzy and shaking uncontrollably. I remember running through the hospital and I was just so relieved that she was alive. And it didn't really matter anything else.
Oh my God, he did it. First time in my life, I literally dropped to my knees. And I stood at the end of her bed, and I looked at her, and I knew that she had endured something that no human being should endure. They had to remove her eye. It was beyond repair. They had a procedure the very next morning to try to connect a vein in her arm because it took the brunt of the shotgun blast. Her arm actually saved her life.
She survived so much. There was multiple surgeries on her brain. And she actually started doing a little bit better. So we got very hopeful.
Within 2 or 3 days, I could tell that she knew I was there, and she knew that Melissa was there. She didn't know where she was, but she knew that we were there.
Mr. Heflin, I'm behind you. I don't want to startle you.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
How are you?
I'm better.
We were conducting an interview with Mr. Heflin at the Frederick County Sheriff's Office.
We run a small nursing home. She had to go upstairs, so I see her phone laying there. God must have made me pick that phone up. I picked the phone up, and there was some man on there she was talking to.
He was on the other end of the phone?
He was texting.
Texting, okay.
Texting. Well, what happened was, after I found him on there, I got really mad about it. I said, look, I thought we had things straightened out. Then she came up and told me she'd had multiple affairs. When she went 3 years ago to stay with my daughter, she took a man down there with her. Well, she point blank hit me with all this and it just broke my heart, officer. Broke my heart.
He was putting it all on her. All the problems in their relationship was because of her. It was about everything that she did wrong.
Well, my heart's been breaking all day. She should have just left. But no, she wanted to stay a month until her boyfriend could get a house for him down in Florida. Well, we got a fight because she's on the phone with him again. She knew that she's going to be on the phone with him. That's going to upset me, you know. I grabbed the phone and she was calling him baby and all that stuff. Officer, I went crazy.
So tell me what happened after you lost your cool.
Well, I grabbed the phone from her. She grabbed me around the arm and started pushing my arm. And I started going crazy. I mean, it went nuts.
What was she doing?
She tore all of her Christmas present boxes up and destroyed everything and went just completely ape. Oh, yeah.
You grabbed the phone and she went into the bathroom.
Right, that's exactly how. She went in the bathroom, pissed off, crying. And I got the shotgun shot through the door. I don't know what possessed me. I'll just shoot through the door and out of scaring it, he'll straighten up. What was I thinking about? You just go wild and crazy in your mind. I'm sure both of you all have had days where things go nuts and you have trouble controlling yourself.
Everybody.
Sure.
I think he was trying to figure out his way of saying he just lost it and it just happened. He was taken to the magistrate and charged with aggravated malicious wounding that night.
The nurses were hopeful, so that gave us hope.
She came out of intensive care because she was doing so well, but the damage with the buckshot in the brain started to bleed.
She got this look on her face, like she was very concerned. I said, "Mom, are you okay?" She said, "Yeah." And then she had a grand mal seizure.
And I remember looking at the head nurse, and her eyes told me what I already knew, that my sister was gone.
At that point, we knew we had a murder investigation.
Oh, believe me, I really didn't mean to do this.
We knew already some of what the defendant was going to testify in his defense.
I pointed the gun at the bathroom door in a rage. The gun went off and it hit her in the head.
She knew that she's going to be on the phone with you, and that's going to upset me. I'm sure both of you all have had days where things go nuts and you have trouble controlling yourself.
Everybody.
Sure.
That is a classic hot blood defense. He was hoping to reduce his exposure from potentially life in prison for first degree all the way down to 10 years in prison for the manslaughter. And we felt very strongly that that would not be justice. First degree murder was the natural charge in this case. We owed that to the victim, to get justice for our victim. First-degree murder requires premeditation and deliberation, but it doesn't require deliberation for any particular period of time. It can be very quick. You can deliberate in the time it takes to grab a knife and go after someone.
When we reenacted it, it took us approximately 15 seconds to get into the gun safe. And then another several seconds to load the gun and walk to the door of the bathroom. So you're looking at between 25 to 30 seconds before he shot the gun.
That's all time that he could have thought, this is a really bad idea. And that's a lot of premeditation, legally speaking. The timeline of this case, it was an all-day event. There was a great deal of video camera footage within the home during the course of the day. And we could see them moving back and forth throughout the house throughout the day. It had started early in the day. They had argued earlier in the day. And she had had communications with this other gentleman, and he was trying to monitor anything that she was doing on her phone, any chance that he had to get a look at her phone so he could determine whether or not she was texting with this person. He had been focused in on this and riling himself up about this all day long.
Mr. Heflin never gave Miss Heflin any space. It's almost like he kept pushing instead of just separating himself from the situation. He continues to make contact with Miss Heflin. He could have just left her alone.
There was some fantastic work done by our investigators. Investigator Schwartz and the others on the team know that we are going to want to see some ballistics. We're going to want to see the trajectory. That's going to be very important in this case. We know that. The investigators load the buckshot holes with dowels so that we can see the general angle of fire. And we see that it is basically straight through the door, a little bit right to left, and a little bit of a downward angle. Just a little bit. And that's critical in this case. If you think about shotgun ammunition, the cartridges all look the same. It's what's inside that plastic cylinder that's important. Mr. Heflin purposely loaded double-aught buckshot in that shotgun. Double-aught buckshot is a larger size ball, where there's only like 8 or 9 of those balls in there. You're dealing with a very large projectile coming out at an extremely high speed with great force and impact, especially at close range. If you know that your wife is holding that door and you are going to fire through it, you know you're going to strike her. The use of those dowels through the hole showing the trajectory was brilliant police work to show us what his real intent was. We were ready to go to trial. We had more than sufficient evidence to obtain a conviction. We were very confident. But there is always risk. You can never be absolutely certain that a jury will determine your way. And you end up either not getting a conviction at all, or you get manslaughter. His lawyers came to us asking if there was any kind of a plea agreement we could reach, first-degree murder being 20 to life, where the defendant might have some hope of seeing the outside world and not dying in prison. And that's what basically gave us the opportunity to take manslaughter off the table, take first-degree life off the table, just focus on second degree. We know we're dealing with anywhere from 5 to 40 years in prison. So we took that to the family and discussed it with them.
When I heard about the plea deal, I was so angry. He deserved the worst that he could possibly get. This was so cruel. This was evil. But it just kind of made sense, because they said he's going to go away for a long time, and this just ensures that he doesn't walk. I just had to trust them, that they knew what they were doing.
Within the plea deal, he could not appeal the sentence. And so that was a little bit more acceptable.
We decided that we would treat the sentencing hearing like a mini trial of the case.
Yeah, she's a gurgling in there. She's breathing. If the ambulance gets here quick, she might be saved.
We played the 911 tape. We played snippets of his interviews. We did those things just to show that the fact that he'd murdered his wife didn't seem to really affect him emotionally at all.
And I got the shotgun shot through the door.
He was callous, premeditated, and just came after her with the intent to kill her.
It was a good verdict. It was a good sentence. And he's going to be in there for a long time before he's even eligible for parole.
While I would have loved to see him get the electric chair or a lethal injection or never get out of prison again, I think he got the best that they were able to give us.
If there's any lesson to be learned from this tragedy, Jenny made a blueprint of what road not to go down, and a warning to anyone out there to believe that they are in danger and to escape from that danger and to be able to live their life in freedom. Jenny had signed to be a donor, organ donor, And even in Jenny's death, she still gave life. The 5 people live today because of her. So throughout Jenny's life, she gave and gave and gave. But I know she's at peace now. She's no longer bullied. She is no longer lorded over and told what to do. And I will forever be proud of her for making that decision to finally break free.
The neon lights of Shinjuku never sleep. But in the winter of 2004, they seemed to flicker with a predatory coldness as a young woman stepped out of her university library and vanished into the city's concrete veins. It started as a routine evening for Haruka Sato, a brilliant scholarship student with a meticulous schedule. Yet by sunrise, her existence had been reduced to a grainy frame of CCTV footage and a single, frozen moment in time. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department launched a massive dragnet, scouring the labyrinthine subway tunnels and the crowded alleyways of Shibuya, but the trail went cold before the first snow fell. Families across the district locked their doors, whispered about this student snatcher, and watched as Haruka's face stared back from fading posters taped to subway pillars, her smile a haunting reminder of a life interrupted. For nearly 22 years, the case sat in a dusty file labeled disappearance, unsolved, a wound in the heart of the community that refused to heal. Detectives retired with her name on their lips, and her parents spent their life savings on private investigators who returned with nothing but empty promises and dead ends. Then, in the biting cold of early 2026, a routine identity audit in a coastal town 300 miles away triggered a digital tripwire that shattered 2 decades of silence. A woman living under the name Emi Tanaka, a quiet florist known for her kindness and her refusal to be photographed, sat across from an officer and uttered the words that stopped the nation's heart. "I am Haruka Sato." The revelation was not a tragedy of abduction or a story of a life stolen by force, but a chilling, voluntary erasure of the self that raises more questions than it answers. The mystery deepens when you realize that for 22 years, a woman declared legally dead was walking among us, breathing the same air, paying taxes under a ghost's name, and building a fortress of lies so impenetrable that even the most advanced facial recognition technology failed to flag her. To understand how Haruka Sato became Emi Tanaka, we have to go back to that final night in December 2004, to the pressure cooker environment of Tokyo's elite academic circles where the weight of expectation can crush the soul. Neighbors remember a girl who was always polite, always studying, always perfect, a porcelain doll of a daughter who never showed a crack in her resolve. But investigators now believe that beneath that veneer of perfection, a radical plan was being forged, a desperate desire to escape a life that felt like a prison. On the night she vanished, Haruka didn't just walk away. She executed a surgical strike against her own identity, leaving behind her wallet, her phone, and every link to her past self in a trash bin 3 blocks from the station. The community shock was immediate, but the strange clue that baffled police for years, a single, one-way ticket to a destination that didn't exist, was actually a coded signal of her intent to cross the border between the known and the unknown. She didn't fall through the cracks of society. She jumped into them with her eyes wide open. As the investigation into her new life unfolds, the sheer audacity of her survival is coming to light, painting a picture of a woman who mastered the art of being invisible in a world of constant surveillance. She didn't hide in the shadows. She hid in plain sight, working manual labor jobs where questions were few and cash was king, eventually procuring a set of forged documents that allowed her to vanish into the mundane life of a rural town. This wasn't a kidnapping. It was a ghost story where the ghost was still walking, talking, and falling in love. The mysterious disappearance that traumatized a generation was, in reality, a meticulously staged exit interview from a reality she could no longer endure. Yet, the emotional climax of this case isn't found in the logistics of her escape, but in the devastation left in her wake. Her parents, now elderly and frail, are forced to reconcile the daughter they mourned as a victim with a woman who chose to let them suffer for 22 years. The haunting memories remaining in the community are no longer about a predator in the dark, but about the terrifying possibility that the people we love can decide to stop loving us without a word of warning. As Tokyo grapples with the truth, the cold case is officially closed, but the psychological mystery of Haruka Sato is only just beginning, leaving us to wonder how many other ghosts are currently standing in line at the grocery store, waiting for their own silence to break. The digital tripwire didn't scream. It whispered a rhythmic pulsing of a cursor on a government server in the dead of a Tuesday night. In the high-tech landscape of 2026, where every citizen's heartbeat is practically logged in a database, the My Number system had become an inescapable net, and for the woman known as Emi Tanaka, the net was finally closing. It began with a routine biometric update, a nationwide push to synchronize facial recognition data with health insurance records, a bureaucratic formality that should have been a non-event. But as the high-definition scanner mapped the contours of Emi's face, the software didn't find a match for a florist born in a small northern village. Instead, it triggered an identity discordance flag, a red-letter alert that sent a silent signal directly to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's cold case unit. For 22 years, the ghost of Haruka Sato had been dancing through the blind spots of a developing digital age, but the future had finally caught up to her. The scene in that sterile municipal office was a study in slow-motion panic. Emi sat perfectly still, her hands folded over a canvas bag smelling of lilies and damp earth, while the clerk's brow furrowed, his eyes darting between the screen and the woman who looked 10 years younger than her forged document suggested. This wasn't just a mysterious disappearance reaching its end. This was the beginning of a forensic autopsy into a life built on sand, a strange clue hidden in the very lines of a woman's face. The arrest was devoid of the typical sirens and shouting matches associated with high-profile captures. It was a quiet, almost respectful abduction by the state. 2 plainclothes officers approached her as she left the office, the coastal wind of the Ibaraki prefecture whipping around their trench coats, and they spoke her true name for the first time in over 2 decades. Haruka Sato. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack the pavement. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled, a long, weary sound of a woman who had been holding her breath since the winter of 2004. As she was led to an unmarked car, the community shock began to ripple through the quiet coastal town where she had served as the local florist for 15 years. Neighbors who had bought funeral wreaths and wedding bouquets from her stood on their porches, clutching their robes, watching the ghost of Shinjuku be driven away. To them, she was Emi, the woman who knew exactly how much water a hydrangea needed and who never failed to bow to the elderly. They knew nothing of the scholarship student, the prestigious university, or the frantic parents who had spent 22 years staring at a phone that never rang. This strange clue of her survival was hidden in the mundane details of her daily life. The way she only used cash, the way she avoided any storefront with a visible security camera, and the way she had systematically scrubbed her existence of any digital footprint. Back in the interrogation room, the atmosphere was suffocating, a mix of stale coffee and the electric hum of recording equipment. The lead detective, a man who had been a rookie when the Sato file was first opened, sat across from a woman who was supposed to be a memory. He laid out the artifacts of her former life like religious relics. Her old student ID, a grainy photo of her 21st birthday, and a missing persons flyer that was now yellowed and brittle. The cold case was thawing in real time, dripping with the sweat of a woman who had successfully hacked the social contract of Japan. How does a 22-year-old girl disappear from one of the most crowded cities on Earth without a trace? The answer was chillingly simple. She had embraced the invisible class. Investigators began to piece together her trajectory. The lost years spent in the windowless rooms of internet cafes, working under-the-table shifts at industrial laundries where no one asked for a passport, and eventually, the acquisition of a dead soul identity. She had purchased the life of Emi Tanaka, a woman who had died in a remote village years prior whose death had gone unreported to the central authorities. It was a community shock of a different kind, the realization that the administrative cracks in the system were wide enough to hide a human being for a lifetime. As the tape rolled, Haruka began to describe the deadlock of her own mind. She didn't speak of a kidnapper or a cult. She spoke of the suffocation of expectations. She described the night in 2004 as a break in reality, a moment where the weight of being the perfect daughter and the perfect student became a physical pressure that threatened to crush her ribs. She hadn't been taken. She had simply stepped out of her life because she couldn't breathe inside it anymore. The sensational nature of her confession wasn't in the crime, but in the lack of one. She had committed the ultimate social sin. She had opted out. She lived through the Great Tohoku earthquake, the rise of the smartphone, and a global pandemic, all while pretending to be a woman who didn't exist. She watched news reports about her own disappearance in the corners of ramen shops, seeing her mother's tear-stained face on the screen, and yet she stayed in the shadows. This was the emotional climax that the public couldn't grasp, the sheer, cold discipline required to remain a ghost while the world screamed your name. The investigation shifted to this strange clue of her forged papers, leading police into the dark underbelly of Tokyo's identity brokers. They found a network of eraser men, specialists who help people vanish for a fee, providing them with a new identity and the mysterious disappearance logistics. Haruka had saved every yen from her part-time tutoring jobs to pay for her own erasure. The community shock intensified as the public realized that her escape wasn't a fluke, but a professional execution. She had studied the police's own methods to stay one step ahead, learning how to blend into the background noise of the city. Every transition in her life was seamless, moving from one anonymous dormitory to another, changing her hair, her gait, and her speech patterns until Haruka Sato was nothing more than a ghost story told to frighten children. The mysterious disappearance was her greatest achievement, a masterpiece of self-annihilation that had lasted 8,000 days. But the lingering shock wasn't just about her survival. It was about the vacuum she left behind. While she was arranging flowers in Ibaraki, her father's health had declined into a fog of dementia where he called out for a daughter who was technically dead. Her mother had become a recluse, her home a shrine to a 2004 version of Haruka that no longer existed. The community shock turned into a national debate on the right to disappear. Was she a victim of a high-pressure society or a perpetrator of a cruel, prolonged psychological torture against her own kin? The strange clue of her motivation remained elusive, hidden behind the calm, porcelain mask she wore in the interrogation room. She didn't look like a woman who had been found. She looked like a woman who had been caught, her sanctuary of silence shattered by the very technology she had spent 20 years evading. The cold case solved headlines were splashed across every digital billboard in Shibuya, ironic reminders that the city she fled was now the city that owned her story. As the sun rose over the Tokyo skyline, the unsolved mystery was technically over, but the lingering impact was just beginning to settle into the bones of the city. The legal system struggled to categorize her actions. Identity theft, fraud, and the obstruction of justice were on the table. But how do you punish someone for being a ghost? The sensational nature of the trial promised to be the event of the decade. A cinematic drama played out in the austere halls of the Tokyo District Court. The missing student was found, but the Haruka Sato who vanished in 2004 was gone forever, replaced by a stranger with the hands of a florist and the eyes of a survivor. The haunting memories would remain, not of a girl who was lost, but of a woman who chose to be found by no one. The credits were rolling on her secret life, and the audience was left in a stunned, suffocating silence, staring at the screen as the truth finally flickered into focus. Sometimes the most dangerous predator in a crime story is the person who decides to leave it. The media firestorm didn't just ignite. It exploded, a supernova of digital noise that turned the quiet precinct in Ibaraki into the epicenter of a global obsession, where the Tokyo 2004 cold case solved headline flashed across every smartphone screen from Hokkaido to Okinawa. Outside the station, A forest of lenses and microphones stood ready to capture the slightest ripple in the narrative. While inside, the woman who had been a phantom for 2 decades sat in a room that smelled of industrial floor wax and forgotten secrets. The tension was a living thing, a coiled spring of community shock that threatened to snap as the public demanded to know. How does a ghost keep a secret for 8,000 days? The investigation was no longer just about a missing girl. It had shifted into a forensic deep dive into the strange clue of her survival. The invisible infrastructure of the Eraser Men. These were the high-stakes brokers of oblivion, the architects of the mysterious disappearance, who operated in the encrypted shadows of the early 2000s, providing a desperate scholarship student with the blueprints for a life without a past. Detectives began tracing a series of untraceable bank transfers, crumbs of a digital trail that led back to a defunct shell company in Roppongi, a place where for the right price, your soul could be scrubbed clean and your fingerprints could be overwritten by the static of a new identity. This wasn't just a cold case coming to life. It was a masterclass in systemic evasion that challenged the very concept of a modern state's control over its citizens. As the interrogation continued, Haruka Sato, or Emi Tanaka, the name she had worn like a second skin, began to describe the deadlock of her early years on the run, a period of shocking surprise where she lived in the literal and metaphorical basements of society. She spoke of this strange clue that had haunted the original investigators, the missing winter coat. It wasn't stolen. She had traded it to a homeless woman in Winopar for a tattered windbreaker and a hat that obscured her face, a tactical move to shed the uniform of the elite student she once was. The community shock grew as the public realized she hadn't just run away. She had conducted a surgical strike against her own biography. While the police were looking for a body in the Aokigahara forest, she was working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour bento factory, her face masked by a surgical shield, her identity buried under a mountain of rice and plastic trays. She was a specter in the machinery of the city, a variable that the algorithms of 2004 weren't designed to catch. The lingering shock intensified when the police raided her small, sun-drenched apartment in the coastal town, expecting to find the lair of a fugitive, but instead discovering a sanctuary of vivid language expressed through botany. The walls weren't covered in maps or clippings of her own case. They were lined with meticulously kept journals on the life cycle of the Lilium auratum, the gold-band lily. There was a strange clue in the silence of that room, a single, framed photograph of the Tokyo skyline at night, the only link to the world she had burned behind her. The mysterious disappearance had evolved into a quiet, peaceful existence that was now being dismantled by men in blue gloves. Neighbors watched from behind lace curtains, their community shock turning into a profound, existential dread. If Emi, the woman who helped them with their gardens, who remembered their children's birthdays, could be a lie, then what was true? The sensational nature of the betrayal was a poison in the well of their small-town trust. They looked for strange clues in their memories. Did she ever hesitate when asked about her childhood? Did she ever flinch at the sound of a siren? They found nothing but the haunting recollection of a woman who was too perfect to be real, a neighbor who was a masterpiece of camouflage. Meanwhile, in a cramped apartment in the suburbs of Tokyo, a woman named Mrs. Sato sat in a room that had remained unchanged since December 2004. The missing student was no longer a face on a poster. She was a living, breathing reality just a few hours away, and the emotional climax was building to an unbearable frequency. Mrs. Sato's life had been a deadlock of grief, a 22-year vigil that had turned her hair white and her heart to stone. The news of the cold case solved hadn't brought the relief the media expected. It brought a shocking surprise of a much darker hue. The daughter she had mourned, the girl she had imagined being taken by a monster, had actually been the architect of her own mother's misery. The lingering impact of this realization was a psychological earthquake. Every candle lit in prayer, every tear shed over a cold dinner, every strange clue she had obsessed over was revealed to be a prop in a play Haruka had written and directed. The haunting memories were being rewritten in real time, transformed from a tragedy of loss into a crime of abandonment. The community that had rallied around the Sados for decades now stood back, paralyzed by the community shock of a victim who was also a perpetrator. The legal deadlock began to tighten its grip as prosecutors struggled to find a statute that fit the audacity of the act. Identity theft was clear, but the strange clue of the dead soul identity she had purchased, Emi Tanaka, complicated everything. The real Emi Tanaka had died of natural causes in a remote mountain village, her death unrecorded by a negligent local official who had since passed away. Haruka hadn't stolen a life. She had occupied a vacuum. The sensational trial would have to address the right to disappear in a hyperconnected age. Was she a mysterious disappearance or a pioneer of a new kind of freedom? The vivid language of the defense lawyers began to frame her as a victim of societal suffocation, a woman who had been driven to the edge of the map by the relentless pressure of a culture that demanded nothing less than perfection. But the community shock was unswayed. The public saw a woman who had let a city bleed for her, who had watched her parents' lives crumble from the safety of her floral sanctuary. The cold case was a mirror being held up to the nation, reflecting a strange clue about the hidden cracks in the Japanese dream. As the sun began to set on the third day since her discovery, the unsolved mystery of her heart remained the most compelling strange clue of all. In the recorded tapes of her interrogation, there is a moment of shocking surprise when the detective asks her if she ever regretted it. There is a long silence, the sound of a woman weighing 22 years of peace against a lifetime of guilt. She doesn't answer with words. She simply looks at her hands. Hands that are calloused from gardening, hands that are no longer those of a scholarship student. And she smiles a small, mysterious disappearance of a smile that chilled the bones of everyone in the room. The emotional climax was not a confession of sorrow, but a chilling affirmation of her choice. The haunting memories of the Haruka that were being replaced by the iron-willed reality of the woman she had become. The lingering impact of that smile would be analyzed by psychologists and talk show hosts for months, a strange clue to a mind that had successfully lived in the void. The community shock rippled outward, touching every corner of the country as people began to look at their own lives, their own deadlocks, and wonder if they, too, could find an eraser man to lead them into the mysterious disappearance of a new identity. The case of Haruka Sato was no longer just a cold case solved. It was a cultural manifesto, a sensational reminder that the person sitting next to you on the train might be a ghost in the making. The strange clue was everywhere now, in the anonymous faces in the crowd, in the vivid language of the internet forums, in the haunting memories of a girl who died so that a woman could live. The narrative was a continuous stream of shock and mystery, a cinematic descent into the heart of a woman who chose the mysterious disappearance of the self over the slow death of a predetermined life. And as the Tokyo 2004 cold case officially transitioned from the police files to the history books, the lingering impact remained, a sense of community shock that would never truly dissipate, a strange clue that even in the brightest neon of Shinjuku, there are shadows deep enough to hide a human soul for an eternity. The sensational nature of the discovery was only heightened by the strange clue of the timing. Why now? Why did the identity discordance flag only trigger in 2026? Investigators began to suspect that the eraser men were failing, their old-world methods of forgery unable to keep pace with the vivid language of the new biometric era. The community shock was laced with a technological terror, the realization that the mysterious disappearance was becoming a physical impossibility. Haruka Sato was perhaps the last of her kind, a ghost of the analog age caught in the digital dragnet of the future. The emotional climax of the case was a funeral for the very idea of anonymity, a sensational end to the era of the missing student who could truly vanish. The haunting memories of her 22-year escape were the last remnants of a world where a person could still own their own identity, even if they had to steal it from a dead girl in a mountain village. The cold case was closed, but the unsolved mystery of our own visibility had only just begun to bleed into the light. The ghost had a guide, a silent architect who mapped the exits of a life that had become a cage, and as the interrogation light flickered in the sterile 2026 precinct, the strange clue of her escape finally found its origin point in a smoky basement cafe in the heart of Shinjuku. It was December 22, 2004, just hours after Haruka Sato had walked out of that university library for the last time, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, when she met the man known only as the cartographer. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a salaryman who had faded into the wallpaper of the city, a man whose vivid language was written in forged birth certificates and scrubbed tax records. For the price of her entire savings and the inheritance left by a grandmother who believed in her brilliance, he offered her the ultimate mysterious disappearance package, a dead soul identity that would allow her to walk through the world without a shadow. The community shock that would eventually paralyze Tokyo was being manufactured in that booth over 2 cups of cold coffee, a sensational transaction that turned a promising student into a permanent phantom. The strange clue that baffled police for decades, the missing winter coat, was actually part of the cartographer's protocol. To become someone new, you must first let the old you freeze to death, he had whispered, and Haruka had listened with the intensity of a zealot. The vivid language of her transformation was a brutal, self-inflicted surgery of the soul, a process of identity erasure that required her to unlearn every gesture, every inflection, and every memory of the girl she had been. She spent the first 6 months in a windowless room in an invisible dormitory, practicing a new gait, a slower way of blinking, and a regional dialect from a prefecture she had never visited. The community shock of her disappearance was a distant roar, a news cycle she watched with clinical detachment on a flickering television set in a communal kitchen. She saw her father's face age a decade in a week. She saw the mysterious disappearance posters plastered on every subway wall, and she felt nothing but a terrifying sense of relief. The strange clue of her psychological state during this time was a total lack of remorse, a shocking surprise to the investigators who now sat across from her in 2026. She wasn't a victim of a cult or a kidnapper. She was a refugee from her own success, a woman who had found the deadlock of expectations so absolute that she chose the social equivalent of suicide. This was the sensational truth that the public couldn't swallow, the idea that a perfect life could be a death sentence, and that a cold case could be a rescue mission orchestrated by the victim herself. The tension in the precinct reached a breaking point when the heavy steel door creaked open to admit a woman who looked like a ghost herself, Mrs. Sato. The emotional climax that the entire nation had been waiting for was about to unfold in a room no larger than a closet, under the watchful eye of a dozen hidden cameras. For 22 years, this mother had lived in the lingering shock of an empty bedroom and a silent phone, her existence a strange clue to the enduring power of grief. As she stepped into the light, her eyes, clouded by age and 1,000 sleepless nights, searched the face of the woman sitting at the table. The community shock was mirrored in her expression, a shocking surprise of recognition battling with the visceral horror of the betrayal. Haruka didn't stand. She didn't reach out. She sat with the stillness of a statue, the Emi Tanaka persona she had worn for 15 years, acting as a suit of armor against the vivid language of her mother's pain. Haruka, the older woman whispered, the name hanging in the air like a question that had no answer. The silence that followed was a deadlock of the heart, a mysterious disappearance of the bond that is supposed to be unbreakable. The vivid language of that encounter was written in what wasn't said. Mrs. Sato reached out a trembling hand to touch the cheek of the daughter she had mourned as dead, only for Haruka to flinch, a strange clue that the woman before her was no longer her child. The community shock intensified as the video of the meeting, leaked by a disgruntled staffer, hit the internet within the hour. The nation watched as the missing student looked her mother in the eye and spoke with the voice of a stranger. "My name is Emmy," she said, her tone as flat as the Ibaraki coastline. "The girl you are looking for died in 2004. I am just the woman who survived her." The sensational cruelty of the statement sent shockwaves through the legal and psychological communities. It was a shocking surprise that challenged the very definition of identity. Could a person truly kill their past self so completely that they felt no obligation to the survivors? The unsolved mystery was no longer where she was, but who she had become, a cold case of the human spirit that refused to be solved by a simple reunion. Outside the precinct, the community shock had morphed into something even more sensational and disturbing: a cult of personality. On social media platforms, a new generation began to hail Haruka as a dark icon, a woman who had the courage to hit the reset button on a life she didn't choose. They used vivid language to describe her as a digital ghost who had beaten a system designed to track every breath. The strange clue of her popularity among the youth was a reflection of a society still grappling with the same pressures that broke her in 2004: the deadlock of high-stakes exams, the suffocation of corporate culture, and the mysterious disappearance of individual agency in the age of algorithms. To them, the cold case solved wasn't a tragedy. It was a blueprint for a different kind of rebellion. They didn't see a daughter who had abandoned her mother. They saw a woman who had reclaimed her soul from the community shock of a pre-scripted life. This sensational shift in public opinion created a strange clue for the prosecutors. How do you convict a woman when half the country secretly wants to be her? The investigation into the Erasermen network, meanwhile, was hitting a deadlock of its own. The cartographer had vanished long ago, his vivid language of forgery replaced by the digital encryption he had predicted 20 years prior. The strange clue that led to his name was a single, coded entry in a ledger found in a raided office in Roppongi, but the trail was cold, a mysterious disappearance that matched Haruka's own. The community shock grew as the public realized that Haruka was likely just one of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of ghosts living under dead soul identities across Japan. The sensational implication was that the society they knew was built on a foundation of phantoms, a strange clue that the neighbor you've known for years might just be another missing student from a 1998 cold case or a 2012 disappearance. The lingering impact of Haruka's discovery was a pervasive sense of paranoia, a shocking surprise that the social fabric was full of holes where people were slipping through every day. As the cold case officially moved toward a trial that promised to be the most sensational in Japanese history, the vivid language of the prosecution began to focus on the strange clue of the real Emi Tanaka. They flew to the remote mountain village where the original Emi had lived and died, a place of haunting memories where the wind whistled through abandoned houses. They found the strange clue of her unmarked grave, a mysterious disappearance of a life that Haruka had worn like a stolen coat. The community shock of that village, seeing the face of their dead neighbor on the evening news, added a new layer of shocking surprise to the narrative. Haruka hadn't just escaped her life. She had parasitized another's, a sensational act of identity theft that the legal system was determined to punish. The deadlock was no longer just psychological. It was a battle over the right to exist versus the duty to be known. The emotional climax of Part 4 comes not from a revelation of guilt, but from a revelation of vivid language found in a diary Haruka had kept during her first year as Emi. The strange clue was hidden in a poem she had written about the lilies she grew, a mysterious disappearance of her former self documented in the growth of a flower. To bloom, she wrote, one must first be buried in the dark, away from the eyes of those who only love the petal and never the root. The community shock of reading those words, published in a sensationalist magazine, was profound. It wasn't the writing of a criminal. It was the vivid language of a woman who had finally found her own voice in the silence of her mysterious disappearance. The haunting memories of the scholarship student were being replaced by the sensational reality of the Lily of Ibaraki, a woman who had turned a cold case into a garden of her own making. The lingering impact of the case continued to swell, a sensational tide that threatened to wash away the old certainties of Japanese identity. The strange clue of her survival was a testament to the human will to be free, even if that freedom was bought with the vivid language of betrayal and the community shock of a 22-year lie. As the cameras remained fixed on the precinct doors, the world waited for the next shocking surprise in a story that had no hero, only a missing student who had found herself in the one place no one thought to look, inside a different name. The cold case solved was just the beginning of a mysterious disappearance into the complexities of the human heart, where the strange clue of the truth was buried deeper than any police file could ever reach. The vivid language of the upcoming trial was already being drafted in the halls of power, a sensational confrontation between the state and the individual that would define the lingering shock of the decade. Haruka Sato, the girl who vanished into the neon, was now the woman who stood in the spotlight, her mysterious disappearance over her strange clue revealed, but her soul still an unsolved mystery that the world was desperate to decode. The community shock was a constant hum, a sensational backdrop to a story that refused to follow the script, a cold case that had thawed into a fire that no one knew how to put out. The vivid language of her silence was the loudest sound in Tokyo, a strange clue that the most powerful act a person can commit is to simply refuse to be who they are told to be, a mysterious disappearance that ends in the most shocking surprise of all, the discovery of a life lived on one's own terms, no matter the cost. The gavel didn't just strike. It signaled the start of a cultural autopsy, a sensational collision between the rigid laws of the state and the fluid nature of a stolen soul. As the doors to the Tokyo District Court swung open in the spring of 2026, the air was thick with the scent of rain and the electric hum of 1,000 transmission towers, all broadcasting the missing student trial to a world hungry for a shocking surprise. Haruka Sato walked into the courtroom not as the trembling victim the public expected, but as a woman who appeared to be carved from the very silence she had inhabited for 22 years. She wore a simple charcoal suit, her hair pulled back with a severity that emphasized the strange clue of her eyes that looked through the judge, through the cameras, and into a horizon no one else could see. The community shock was palpable as she took her seat, a cold case brought to life in a room where every whisper sounded like a scream. This wasn't just a trial for identity theft or fraud. It was a reckoning for a society that had watched a girl vanish and only cared once she was found. The vivid language of the indictment was read with a clinical coldness, a list of strange clues and deadlocks that reduced 22 years of survival to a series of legal violations. But the woman in the dock remained an unsolved mystery in human form. The prosecution, led by a woman known for her surgical precision, Prosecutor Koda, wasted no time in framing Haruka's mysterious disappearance as a calculated act of psychological terrorism. She displayed the vivid language of the original 2004 police reports, the strange clue of the discarded wallet, and the haunting memories of a search that had cost the taxpayers millions and her parents their sanity. This was not an escape. Koda's voice rang out, a sensational accusation that echoed through the gallery. This was a theft. She didn't just steal the identity of Emi Tanaka. She stole the peace of a nation and the heart of her own mother. The community shock deepened as Koda presented a strange clue previously unknown to the public. A series of letters Haruka had written but never sent, found in a hidden compartment of her flora shop. These weren't letters of apology. They were vivid language manifestos of a woman who felt she had been socially murdered by the expectations of her former life. The shocking surprise was the lack of a deadlock in her mind. She was entirely convinced of her right to vanish, a sensational defiance that turned the courtroom into a battlefield of ideologies. While the trial raged inside, a mysterious disappearance of a different kind was happening across the country. The ghost community, Japan's Johatsu, the thousands who disappear every year to start new lives, was in a state of community shock and absolute panic. Haruka's capture by the 2026 digital identity audit had sent a strange clue to every other phantom living in the shadows. The era of the invisible class was over. In the week following the cold case solved announcement, reports of sudden departures and abandoned apartments spiked in rural prefectures. People who had lived as dead souls for decades were fleeing again, terrified that the vivid language of the facial recognition net would snag them next. This sensational ripple effect turned Haruka into more than just a defendant. She became a harbinger of the deadlock between privacy and security. The unsolved mystery of her survival was now a threat to the thousands of others who had followed in her footsteps, a strange clue that even the deepest shadow can be pierced by a modern light. The haunting memories of those who had evaporated were being churned up by the media circus, creating a community shock that felt like a national fever dream. Inside the courtroom, the vivid language of the defense began to paint a very different picture of the mysterious disappearance. Her lawyer, a man who specialized in the strange clues of human rights, argued that Haruka was a victim of a deadlock so profound it had left her with no choice but to cease to exist. He called to the stand a former classmate from the 2004 scholarship program, a woman who spoke with vivid language about the shocking surprise of the pressure they had all faced. She described a world of haunting memories where failure was not an option and where a single mistake felt like a mysterious disappearance of one's future. The community shock shifted as the public began to see this strange clue of the 2004 social landscape, a pressure cooker of academic and familial expectation that had claimed more than just Haruka's identity. This sensational argument was that Haruka hadn't run away from her family. She had run away from a social script that was written in a language she couldn't speak. This unsolved mystery of the right to leave became the centerpiece of the trial, a strange clue that the cold case was a symptom of a much larger, sensational illness in the heart of the city. The emotional climax of the week came when the strange clue of a 2005 receipt was entered into evidence, a ticket for a ferry to Hokkaido that Haruka had never boarded. The prosecution used this to show a mysterious disappearance plan that involved misdirection, but the defense used it to show the deadlock of a young girl who was terrified of her own shadow. They argued that her path to becoming Emi Tanaka was not a sensational criminal plot, but a desperate, vivid language search for a place where she could breathe. The community shock reached a new peak when Haruka herself was finally allowed to speak. The unsolved mystery of her voice, silent for 22 years, filled the courtroom with a vivid language that was both beautiful and terrifying. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't offer a shocking surprise confession of regret. Instead, she spoke about the haunting memories of the lilies in her garden and how they didn't care about her name. "A flower doesn't have a scholarship," she whispered, a strange clue into her psyche that left the gallery in a deadlock of silence. "A flower just is. I wanted to be a flower." The sensational nature of her testimony was a shocking surprise that broke the internet. The lily of Ibaraki became a hashtag, a symbol for everyone who felt trapped in their own lives. The community shock was no longer directed at her mysterious disappearance, but at the vivid language of the world that had made it necessary. Yet, the strange clue of the real Emi Tanaka's family remained a dark cloud over the proceedings. A distant cousin of the dead girl sat in the back of the court, a haunting memory of the life that had been usurped. To them, Haruka wasn't a sensational icon. She was a grave robber, a mysterious disappearance of their own family history into the selfish needs of a stranger. This deadlock of suffering, the mother who lost a daughter and the family who lost a name, created a lingering shock that no verdict could ever resolve. The unsolved mystery of justice in this case was becoming a vivid language puzzle that the law wasn't equipped to solve. As the trial moved into its final stages, the strange clue of the eraser man resurfaced. A whistleblower from the 2004 identity underworld came forward with vivid language about how Haruka had been one of their most successful cases. He described the mysterious disappearance protocols that had allowed her to vanish, including the strange clue of her identity training in the Roppongi basements. The community shock was reignited by the sensational realization that Haruka had been part of a professional erasure, a shocking surprise that suggested she was more calculated than the victim of pressure narrative suggested. This deadlock between her vulnerability and her cold, technical execution of the escape kept the nation in a state of lingering impact. Was she a missing student who found her way, or a sensational manipulator who had played a 22-year game of hide-and-seek with the hearts of those who loved her? The unsolved mystery deepened with every strange clue that emerged from the shadows of the Erasermen's archives. The vivid language of the closing arguments was a masterpiece of sensational drama. Prosecutor Coda spoke of the haunting memories of the parents and the community shock of the stolen identity, calling for a sentence that would reflect the mysterious disappearance of the victim's empathy. The defense spoke of the deadlock of the human soul and the strange clue of a woman who had simply chosen to live, calling for a shocking surprise of mercy. The unsolved mystery was now in the hands of the judges, while the community shock continued to pulse through the neon-lit streets of Tokyo. The cold case solved headlines were being replaced by the trial of the century banners, a sensational transition that showed how a single woman's mysterious disappearance had become a mirror for an entire civilization's haunting memories and strange clues. The lingering impact of Part 5 is the sense that the unsolved mystery of Haruka Sato is no longer about where she was, but about the deadlock of who she is now. The vivid language of the trial had stripped her bare, but the strange clue of her true self remained hidden behind the Emi Tanaka mask. As the court adjourned for deliberations, the community shock settled into a heavy, suffocating weight. The sensational story had reached a point of no return, a shocking surprise of a narrative that refused to offer an easy cold case solve ending. The haunting memories of the 2004 winter were still there, but they were now joined by the vivid language of the 2026 spring, a season of mysterious disappearance and strange clues that had only just begun to reveal its true cost. The deadlock was absolute, and the community shock was the only thing that felt real in a world made of ghosts and sensational lies. The deliberation room of the Tokyo District Court was a vacuum of silence, a stark contrast to the sensational chaos swirling in the streets outside, where the world waited for a verdict that would either solidify the cold case as a closed chapter or ignite a new era of social rebellion. For 72 hours, 3 judges sat behind heavy oak doors, dissecting the vivid language of Haruka Sato's testimony and weighing it against the haunting memories of a family she had effectively erased from her timeline. During this period of agonizing deadlock, a cleaning crew discovered a strange clue left behind in the defendant's holding area. A small, intricate origami lily folded from a page of a legal briefing. It was a vivid language message without a single written word, a symbol of the Emi Tanaka persona she had cultivated with such mysterious disappearance precision. This wasn't the act of a woman seeking forgiveness. It was the act of a woman asserting her existence as a creator of her own reality. The community shock reached a fever pitch as rumors of this paper flower leaked to the press, turning the missing student into a sensational folk hero for the dispossessed and the invisible. When the heavy bronze bells of the courthouse finally signaled the judge's return, the atmosphere in the gallery was so thin it felt as though the breath had been sucked out of the room. Haruka was led in, her face a mask of vivid language that revealed nothing, her eyes fixed on a point above the judges' heads. The community shock was a low hum, a physical vibration of thousands of people holding their breath in unison across the city's digital screens. The lead judge, a man whose career was defined by the deadlock of traditional jurisprudence, began to read the verdict with a sensational gravitas that felt like the tolling of a bell. The unsolved mystery was about to meet the crushing weight of the law, but the vivid language of his preamble suggested that the court was struggling with the very definition of a crime when the victim and the perpetrator are the same person. He spoke of the haunting memories of the Sato family, the strange clue of the identity theft, and the mysterious disappearance that had traumatized the community. But he also spoke of the deadlock of a society that offers no exit for those who cannot fit its mold. The shocking surprise came not in the verdict itself, but in the vivid language of its justification. Haruka Sato was found guilty of identity theft and the falsification of official documents, a sensational but predictable outcome. However, the sentence was a strange clue to the court's inner conflict. A 5-year term, suspended for 3, meaning she would not spend another day in a cell unless she committed another crime. The community shock was instantaneous, a sensational explosion of outrage and celebration that tore through the gallery. To the traditionalists, this was a mysterious disappearance of justice, a betrayal of the sanctity of the family and the state. To the Lily of Ibaraki followers, it was a vivid language victory, a recognition that the deadlock of her 2004 life was a mitigating factor that the law could no longer ignore. The unsolved mystery had been solved with a compromise that left everyone in a state of lingering shock. The emotional climax of the courtroom scene was not the judge's gavel, but the look that passed between Haruka and her mother as the guard began to lead the missing student out of the room. Mrs. Sato stood, her hands trembling as she clutched a photo of the 2004 Haruka, a haunting memory that she refused to let go. For a fleeting second, the Emi Tanaka mask slipped, and a strange clue of the old Haruka flickered in the daughter's eyes, a vivid language flash of grief, or perhaps just the reflection of a life she no longer recognized. There was no sensational reunion, no tears of joy, only the mysterious disappearance of a connection that had once been the center of their universe. The community shock of that silent rejection was more powerful than any legal ruling. The missing student was found, but the daughter was truly, irrevocably gone, a cold case of the heart that would never be reopened. Outside the courthouse, the vivid language of the media was predatory, a sensational swarm of cameras and microphones that Haruka had to navigate like a soldier through a minefield. She didn't speak to the reporters. She didn't offer a shocking surprise soundbite for the evening news. She simply walked into the rain, her head held high, a mysterious disappearance in slow motion. The strange clue of her future was a blank page, a vivid language invitation for the public to project their own fears and desires onto her. The community shock began to shift into a lingering impact of paranoia. If the state could not truly punish a woman for vanishing, then what was to stop anyone else from hitting the reset button? The unsolved mystery of Haruka Sato had become a sensational virus, a vivid language contagion that threatened the very foundations of the social contract. In the days following the trial, the strange clue of the Erasermen network became a national obsession. The police, spurred by the community shock of the lenient verdict, launched a massive crackdown on the vivid language of the identity underworld. They found mysterious disappearance kits in the lockers of high school students. They found strange clues of dead soul, identities being traded like currency in the dark corners of the web. The sensational discovery was that Haruka wasn't an anomaly. She was a pioneer. The haunting memories of her 22-year escape were being used as a textbook by thousands of others looking for a way out of their own deadlocks. This was the lingering impact that the judges hadn't foreseen, a vivid language movement of ghosts who saw the missing student not as a criminal, but as a sensational liberator. The vivid language of the Sato family's grief, meanwhile, turned inward, a strange clue to the destructive power of a cold case solved. Mr. Sato, whose mind had been a mysterious disappearance of its own through dementia, passed away just a week after the verdict. His last words a haunting memory of a daughter who no longer existed. The community shock of his death was a sensational postscript to the trial, a vivid language tragedy that stripped away any remaining glamour from Haruka's rebellion. The unsolved mystery of why she didn't come back sooner, why she let her father die without knowing the truth, became the new strange clue that turned the public's sensational adoration back into a cold, vivid language scrutiny. The Lily of Ibaraki was now seen as a vivid language parasite, a woman who had bloomed in the soil of her parents' misery. As Haruka attempted to return to her life in the coastal town, she found the community shock that had hardened into a vivid language of isolation. This strange clue of her florist shop, once a place of peace, was now a sensational tourist attraction, its windows smashed and its walls covered in vivid language graffiti that called her a ghost and a traitor. The mysterious disappearance of her anonymity was the ultimate deadlock. She had escaped the sensational pressure of 2000 for only to be caught in the vivid language glare of 2026. The haunting memories of her quiet life as Emi Tanaka were being overwritten by the sensational reality of being Haruka Sato, the most famous missing student in the world. The strange clue of her survival was now her prison, a vivid language cage made of fame and infamy. In a shocking surprise twist that no one saw coming, Haruka didn't stay to fight for her new identity. She didn't give the sensational interviews or write the vivid language memoir that publishers were offering millions for. Instead, she performed one last mysterious disappearance. On a foggy Tuesday morning, just a month after the trial, her apartment was found empty. There was no strange clue left behind, no vivid language note, just a single gold-band lily on the kitchen table. The community shock was a sensational echo of 2004, a vivid language, repeat of a history that refused to be learned. The unsolved mystery was back, but this time there was no scholarship, no deadlock of exams, and no family left to mourn. She had vanished into the vivid language of the city once more, a sensational phantom who had learned that the only way to be free is to never be found at all. The lingering impact of Part 6 is the realization that the cold case was never about the law, but about the vivid language of the human will to be unknown. The strange clue of her second disappearance was a sensational indictment of a world that refuses to let people change. The community shock was a vivid language testament to the power of a mysterious disappearance to hold a nation captive. As the police began a new unsolved mystery file, the haunting memories of Haruka Sato and Emi Tanaka merged into a single, sensational legend of the woman who vanished twice. The vivid language of her silence was her final word, a strange clue that the most sensational thing a person can do is to truly, finally, become a ghost in a world of vivid language and constant surveillance. The sensational story of the missing student found alive had transitioned into a vivid language myth, a strange clue for the next generation of ghosts, who would look at the neon lights of Shinjuku and see not a city, but a mysterious disappearance waiting to happen. The community shock would eventually fade, but the haunting memories of the trial and the vivid language of the verdict would remain a deadlock in the national consciousness. The cold case was closed, but the unsolved mystery of the woman who stole herself was just beginning to breathe. The sensational double vanishing of Haruka Sato didn't just leave an empty apartment. It left a void in the national psyche, a shocking surprise that felt like a deliberate slap in the face of a system that had just begun to congratulate itself on its own efficiency. As the police tape fluttered in the salty Ibaraki breeze, the strange clue of the gold band lily sat on the table like a vivid language punctuation mark at the end of a sentence no one wanted to read. This was no longer a cold case solved. It was a sensational escalation of an unsolved mystery that had transcended the boundaries of a simple criminal file. The community shock was instantaneous and acidic, a mix of haunting memories and the realization that the missing student had mastered the art of the exit better than any professional eraser man in the business. While the media scrambled to explain the vivid language of her second escape, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department fell into a state of deadlock, their digital dragnets coming up empty, their high-speed facial recognition cameras capturing nothing but the anonymous, blurred faces of a city that was suddenly looking very much like a collection of ghosts. The sensational focus of the investigation soon shifted to a package delivered to the desk of Prosecutor Coda, a strange clue that would provide a vivid language bridge between the 2004 disappearance and the 2026 vanishing. Inside a plain, unmarked envelope was an old, scratched mini disc, a relic of the early 2000s, and a handwritten note that read, "To find the truth, you must listen to the silence." The shocking surprise of this digital antique sent the technical units into a frenzy, searching for hardware that could still read the vivid language of a dead format. When the audio finally crackled to life, it wasn't the voice of a criminal that filled the room, but the vivid language of a girl from 2004, a haunting memory recorded on the very night she first stepped into the shadows. The recording was a sensational revelation of a mysterious disappearance in progress. She spoke of the deadlock of her scholarship, the community shock she anticipated, and a strange clue about a man who didn't exist. "The cartographer didn't find me," the voice whispered through the static, a vivid language confession that chilled the bones of every investigator present. "I invented him." This shocking surprise flipped the unsolved mystery on its head, suggesting that the sensational network of eraser men might have been a smokescreen, a vivid language fiction created by a 21-year-old girl to lead the police into a deadlock of their own making. The community shock intensified as the realization set in. Haruka Sato wasn't a passenger in her own escape. She was the architect. The vivid language of the trial had been a performance, a sensational piece of theater designed to test the limits of the system before she slipped through its fingers a second time. The strange clue of the mini-disc was her final vivid language lesson to the state, a haunting memory that proved she was always 3 steps ahead of the cold case unit. The unsolved mystery was no longer about where she was, but how many other missing students were currently living in the vivid language of a self-made ghost story. The sensational pursuit of the woman who vanished twice led detectives back to the vivid language of the Shinjuku underworld. But this time they weren't looking for brokers. They were looking for strange clues in the architecture of the city itself. They began to investigate dead spots in the surveillance grid, the vivid language of blind alleys, abandoned basements, and utility tunnels that hadn't been mapped in decades. The community shock grew as the public learned about the invisible city that existed beneath the neon, a mysterious disappearance playground where a person could live for years without ever being caught on a sensor. The haunting memories of the 2004 search were being relived by a new generation of officers who found vivid language, evidence of someone having lived in the crawl spaces of the very university library where she was last seen. The strange clue of a 2004 candy wrapper and a vivid language notebook found in a ventilation shaft suggested that the missing student hadn't even left the building for the first 48 hours of her mysterious disappearance. She had watched them search for her, a sensational and shocking surprise that painted a picture of a predator-like patience. The vivid language of the internet's reaction turned from curiosity to a sensational form of worship as the unsolved mystery of Haruka's second escape became a vivid language manifesto for the disappeared. "Haruka is everywhere" became a sensational slogan, a strange clue scrawled on the walls of subway stations and the vivid language of digital forums. The community shock was now a sensational divide between the haunting memories of the old world and the vivid language of a new, untraceable existence. Prosecutor Coda, obsessed with the strange clue of the mini-disc, began to spiral into a deadlock of her own, her vivid language of law and order failing to contain the sensational reality of a woman who had essentially hacked the human condition. She spent nights listening to the haunting memories of the 19-year-old Haruka, searching for a vivid language slip-up, a strange clue that would reveal the destination of the 41-year-old Emmy. The emotional climax of the investigation came when a vivid language tip led the police to a remote shrine in the mountains of Nagano, a place of haunting memories where the missing student had reportedly been seen. The sensational raid was carried out under the cover of a vivid language mist, a shocking surprise of tactical precision that ended in another deadlock. There was no one at the shrine, only a strange clue left on the altar. A 2004 university ID card, its vivid language of name and photo scratched out with a sensational violence. The community shock of this discovery was profound. It was a vivid language ritual of finality, a mysterious disappearance of the last link to Haruka Sato. The unsolved mystery was being systematically dismantled by the subject herself, a vivid language erasure that was as sensational as it was terrifying. As the vivid language of the media cycle began to move on to the next sensational crime, the lingering impact of the Haruka Sato case remained like a strange clue in the back of the national mind. The community shock had settled into a vivid language of quiet anxiety, a haunting memory that suggested no one is who they say they are. The cold case unit was eventually disbanded, its vivid language of failure a sensational embarrassment to the department. The unsolved mystery of the woman who vanished twice was moved to a special archive, a strange clue to the deadlock of the modern age. The vivid language of her story became a haunting memory told in hushed tones, a sensational urban legend of the perfect ghost who proved that in a world of total visibility, the only mysterious disappearance that matters is the one you do for yourself. The strange clue that Coda eventually found, not in the mini disc, but in the vivid language of the 2004 library records, was a shocking surprise that she never shared with the public. Haruka hadn't been studying law or medicine. She had been checking out vivid language texts on the mysterious disappearance of historical figures, a strange clue that her sensational escape had been in the works since she was a teenager. The unsolved mystery wasn't a reaction to pressure. It was a vivid language ambition, a sensational desire to become a haunting memory while still alive. The community shock would have been total if the truth were known. She didn't hate her life. She just loved the vivid language of the void. And as Coda stood on the roof of the police headquarters, looking out at the sensational lights of Tokyo, she realized that the missing student wasn't hiding in the mountains or the tunnels. She was right there in the vivid language of the crowd, a strange clue in the corner of everyone's eye, a mysterious disappearance that would never truly be found because she was no longer a person. She was a vivid language shadow that the light could no longer touch. The sensational nature of the case concluded with a vivid language of absolute silence, a strange clue that the greatest mysterious disappearance is the one that leaves no haunting memories behind. The community shock eventually became a vivid language of acceptance, a deadlock of the soul that acknowledged the unsolved mystery as a permanent part of the city's vivid language. Haruka Sato was gone. Emi Tanaka was gone. And the vivid language of the missing student was just a sensational whisper in the wind, a strange clue to a world that was learning painfully that some cold cases are better left in the dark. The ventilation shaft of the Tokyo Central University Library was a tomb of recycled air and forgotten dust, a mechanical lung that had remained sealed for 22 years until a routine seismic retrofitting in late 2026 revealed the strange clue that would shatter the cold case solved narrative once and for all. Behind a rusted grate, tucked into a corner where the blueprints said no space should exist, investigators found a vivid language archive, a bundle of notebooks wrapped in waterproof plastic, the Haruka Manifesto. This was not the work of a frightened girl. It was the sensational blueprint of a revolutionary. The missing student had not just vanished. She had performed a mysterious disappearance of her own soul, documenting the process with a vivid language so cold and precise it sent a community shock through the heart of the Metropolitan Police. As Prosecutor Koda turned the yellowed pages, the unsolved mystery of Haruka Sato began to bleed into a shocking surprise of existential horror. The notebooks revealed that the deadlock of her 2004 life was a choice she had made long before she stepped into the Shinjuku night, a strange clue that her entire existence had been a vivid language performance leading up to the ultimate sensational exit. The vivid language of the manifesto was a sensational indictment of the very society that was now obsessed with her. Identity is a prison built by the gaze of others, she had written in an entry dated October 2004, a strange clue that her mysterious disappearance was an act of liberation, not a tragedy. The community shock intensified as Coda read the vivid language descriptions of her parents, not as loved ones, but as narrative anchors that she needed to sever to achieve sensational weightlessness. The missing student had spent her final semester studying the vivid language of urban camouflage, learning how to disappear into the deadlock of the crowd by becoming the most mundane version of herself. The strange clue of the eraser man was finally debunked. The manifesto proved that Haruka had invented the figure of the cartographer to give the police a sensational phantom to chase, a vivid language decoy that had worked for over 2 decades. This shocking surprise turned the cold case into a masterclass in psychological warfare, where the victim was the only person who knew the rules of the game. The sensational hunt for the woman who vanished twice now entered a vivid language phase of desperation, as the police realized they weren't looking for a woman, but for a mysterious disappearance philosophy in human form. The community shock had mutated into a sensational paranoia, as people began to wonder if their own lives were just vivid language scripts they could walk away from. Sightings of the ghost of Haruka were reported in every corner of the city. A strange clue in a subway station, a vivid language glimpse of a woman with her eyes in a convenience store mirror. The unsolved mystery had become a sensational contagion, a vivid language virus of anonymity that was spreading through the deadlock of the digital age. Coda, now haunted by the vivid language of the manifesto, began to see the strange clue of Haruka's influence in the mysterious disappearance of other students, a sensational ripple effect that suggested the missing student was now an invisible mentor to a new generation of ghosts. The vivid language of the manifesto also contained a strange clue about her second disappearance, a sensational prediction of the 2026 biometric audit. When the machines learned to see our faces, she had written in 2004, a shocking surprise of foresight. We must learn to change our bones. This vivid language suggested that the Emi Tanaka persona was always meant to be a sensational temporary shell, a strange clue that she had a mysterious disappearance planned for the digital era that the police were only just beginning to grasp. The community shock was absolute. The missing student had been playing a sensational, long game that spanned 2 technological eras, a vivid language bridge between the analog past and the surveillance future. The deadlock of the investigation was no longer about a lack of evidence, but about a vivid language that the police didn't have the vocabulary to translate. As the vivid language of the manifesto hit the press, the sensational cult of Haruka Sato grew into a community shock that paralyzed the city. Young people began to leave strange clues of their own, vivid language notes in libraries, mysterious disappearance signals on social media, all echoing the sensational prose of the missing student. The unsolved mystery was no longer a crime to be solved. It was a vivid language lifestyle to be emulated. The haunting memories of the 2004 Haruka were being replaced by the sensational reality of a woman who had successfully hacked the social contract. Coda realized that the strange clue she was looking for wasn't in the manifesto, but in the vivid language of the city itself. Haruka wasn't hiding. She was the vivid language of the crowd, a sensational ghost who had achieved the mysterious disappearance of her own physical existence by becoming an idea. The vivid language of Part 8 reaches its emotional climax in a sensational confrontation between Coda and the ghost of Haruka's intent. Coda returned to the library ventilation shaft, searching for one last strange clue, and found a vivid language inscription on the back of the grate that she had missed before. "You're looking for me in the past." It read, a shocking surprise that felt like a sensational punch to the gut. But I am the future you are afraid of. The community shock of this discovery was a vivid language realization that the missing student had won. The cold case was a sensational distraction, a strange clue that kept the world looking backward while Haruka walked into the mysterious disappearance of the light. The deadlock was absolute, and the vivid language of the city was the only thing that remained, a sensational roar of 1,000 unsolved mysteries, walking the streets in plain sight. The lingering impact of Part 8 is the vivid language of a world that has lost its grip on reality. The sensational discovery of the manifesto didn't close the cold case. It opened a mysterious disappearance of the truth. The strange clue was that the missing student was never missing. She was just vivid language in a world of static. The community shock was the sensational realization that anyone could be a ghost, and the unsolved mystery of Haruka Sato was just the vivid language prologue to a much larger mysterious disappearance of a human identity. As Kota stood in the deadlock of the library, the vivid language of the past whispered through the vents, a sensational reminder that the missing student was found, but the woman she became was a strange clue that would haunt the community shock for an eternity. The vivid language of the investigation now turned to the sensational possibility that Haruka was still in the building, a strange clue that she had never left the mysterious disappearance of the library's hidden spaces. The community shock was a vivid language of terror as the police began a sensational floor-by-floor search, but the unsolved mystery only deepened. Every strange clue they found, a vivid language scrap of paper, a sensational footprint in the dust, was another mysterious disappearance of their own certainty. The missing student was the vivid language architect of their deadlock, a sensational ghost who was laughing from the strange clue of the shadows. The cold case solved was a vivid language lie, and the sensational truth was that Haruka Sato was the unsolved mystery that would never die. The library's silence was never empty. It was a pressurized chamber of history. But as the specialized forensic teams tore through the false paneling of the third-floor archives, they realized the silence had been a lie, a mysterious disappearance, a physical space that had been occupied by a shadow for decades. The discovery of the Haruka Manifesto had been a shocking surprise, but it was the strange clue of a second, deeper cavity, a crawl space behind the North Wing's historical records, that sent a community shock through the university like an academic earthquake. This wasn't just a dusty hole in the wall. It was a sensational habitat, a vivid language of survival that proved the missing student had lived within the literal bones of the institution that was supposed to be her future. While the city searched for her in the forests and the rivers, Haruka had built a shadow kingdom, within earshot of the very professors who had failed to notice her absence. The unsolved mystery was no longer about a girl who ran away. It was about a girl who had stayed and watched us all from the deadlock of the architecture. Inside this vivid language of a sanctuary, the air was heavy with the smell of old paper and the metallic tang of modern batteries, a strange clue that turned the cold case into a current emergency. Investigators found a small, high-end monitoring station, a sensational array of modified tablets and long-range microphones that were patched into the university's own security feed. The shocking surprise was that Haruka hadn't just lived here in 2004. She had returned. This was her vivid language vantage point during the 2026 trial. While the world watched her in the courtroom, she was watching the world from the mysterious disappearance of the library's infrastructure. The community shock of the faculty was absolute. The idea that a missing student could haunt her own campus for 22 years, using their own electricity and their own Wi-Fi to orchestrate her sensational escape, was a blow to the ego of the entire state. The unsolved mystery of how she bypassed the biometric scanners and the thermal sensors was a strange clue to the deadlock of technology. She hadn't fought the system. She had simply become its vivid language ghost. The vivid language of the room was a sensational collage of obsession. One wall was covered in a mysterious disappearance map of Tokyo's underground, but not the subway maps the public uses. This was a strange clue of the dark grid, the abandoned utility tunnels, the forgotten air raid shelters, and the vivid language of the city's forgotten veins. The community shock grew as police realized she had been using these tunnels to move between the university and her florist shop in Ibaraki, a sensational commute through the deadlock of the earth. The unsolved mystery of the woman who vanished twice was being solved by the vivid language of her own maps, but every answer only led to a more shocking surprise. She hadn't been hiding. She had been vivid language, navigating a different version of reality, a strange clue that she was the only person in Tokyo who was truly free. Prosecutor Koda stood in the center of the hidden room, her vivid language of law and order feeling like a blunt instrument in a room built for a sensational scalpel. She found a strange clue on the desk, a digital recorder that was still warm to the touch. When she pressed play, the vivid language of the audio was a shocking surprise that broke her professional composure. It wasn't a manifesto or a confession. It was a sensational recording of the trial proceedings from only days prior, but with a vivid language commentary by Haruka herself. They are looking at the mask. The voice whispered a haunting memory in the making. They are looking for the girl who was, not the woman who is. They're trying to solve a cold case that hasn't even begun. The community shock of hearing her voice, so calm and sensational in its detachment, was a deadlock of the spirit. Koda realized that the trial hadn't been a search for justice. It had been a vivid language experiment conducted by the defendant. The sensational details of her hidden life began to leak to the press, creating a mysterious disappearance of public trust in the university. Living under the floor, the headline screamed, a vivid language of institutional shock that fueled the strange clue of Haruka's growing legend. The unsolved mystery was now a sensational ghost story that everyone was participating in. People began to tap on the walls of their own offices, searching for a strange clue that someone might be living in the deadlock of their own lives. The vivid language of the city had changed. The community shock had turned into a sensational paranoia where every shadow was a potential Haruka. The cold case had become a vivid language of the present, a shocking surprise that suggested the missing student was never gone, just sensational in her invisibility. In the corner of the hidden room, Koda found the most sensational and strange clue of all, a series of photographs of herself. These weren't vivid language surveillance shots. They were intimate, candid moments of Koda at her desk, in her car, and even in her own home. The shocking surprise was that the missing student had been stalking the prosecutor. The unsolved mystery of Haruka's second disappearance was now a vivid language threat, a sensational reversal where the hunter was the prey. The community shock of the legal team was a deadlock of fear. If Haruka could infiltrate the vivid language of a prosecutor's life, no one was safe. The strange clue of the photographs was a sensational message. I see you, but you can only see the cold case I left behind. The vivid language of Part 9 reaches its emotional climax as Koda realizes the sensational truth of the second disappearance. Haruka hadn't run to the mountains or the coast. She had moved into the vivid language of Koda's own world. The strange clue of a missing key from Koda's office, the mysterious disappearance of a specific file from the trial, it all pointed to a shocking surprise of total infiltration. The community shock was a sensational realization that the missing student had replaced her old identity not with a new one, but with a vivid language of pure existence. She was the unsolved mystery that lived in the deadlock of the system, a sensational ghost who was now writing the vivid language of the very law that tried to catch her. As the vivid language of the investigation intensified, the sensational search for Haruka Sato became a mysterious disappearance of the self for Koda. She began to stay at the library, sleeping in the strange clue of the hidden room, trying to inhabit the vivid language of the woman who had bested her. The community shock turned into a sensational concern for the prosecutor's sanity, a deadlock of the cold case that was consuming everyone involved. The unsolved mystery was a vivid language abyss, and the strange clue was that there was no bottom. The missing student was found, but the sensational reality of her mysterious disappearance was a vivid language that could never be translated into a verdict. The vivid language of Part 9 ends with a sensational and shocking surprise left for Coda on the very tablets Haruka had used. A single vivid language file titled The Next Chapter was opened on the screen. It contained a strange clue, a live feed of a mysterious disappearance in progress at a completely different location in the city. The community shock was a sensational realization that Haruka wasn't just hiding. She was vivid language active, a sensational director of a new unsolved mystery that would make the 2004 case look like a vivid language rehearsal. The deadlock was shattered, but the vivid language of the aftermath was a sensational terror. The cold case was a strange clue to a future that was already here, a vivid language of ghosts who were tired of being watched and had decided to start watching back. The sensational impact of this discovery was a vivid language of total uncertainty. The missing student found alive was no longer the headline. The vivid language of the watcher in the walls was the new community shock. The unsolved mystery of Haruka Sato had evolved into a sensational game of cat and mouse, where the cat was a vivid language ghost and the mouse was the entire city of Tokyo. The strange clue was everywhere, a vivid language of mysterious disappearance that had finally, sensational, LY, become the new normal. The cold case was closed, but the vivid language of the haunting was just beginning to scream. The blue light of the tablet screen was a sensational pulse in the darkness of the library's hidden room, a vivid language beacon that drew Prosecutor Coda deeper into a mysterious disappearance that was no longer a case file, but a living, breathing predator. The strange clue of the live feed wasn't just a recording. It was a sensational real-time broadcast of a shocking surprise unfolding in the guts of the city, a vivid language nightmare where the boundaries between the hunter and the hunted had completely dissolved. Coda watched, her breath a deadlock in her throat, as the camera moved with a sensational fluidity through a space that the maps of Tokyo didn't acknowledge. The Hibiya Phantom Station, a mysterious disappearance platform that had been sealed since the 1960s and forgotten by everyone except the vivid language of the ghosts. The community shock of the discovery was a sensational weight, a strange clue that Haruka Sato hadn't just been hiding in the library. She had been vivid language colonizing the infrastructure of the entire metropolis. This was the unsolved mystery of the Dark Grid, a sensational subterranean world where the missing student was the undisputed queen of shadows. The vivid language of the live feed showed a figure sitting on a rusted bench, their face obscured by the sensational flicker of dying fluorescent lights. And as the camera zoomed in, the shocking surprise hit Coda like a vivid language physical blow. It wasn't Haruka Sato. It was a young man, a strange clue to a new mysterious disappearance in progress. A brilliant tech prodigy who had vanished from his corporate office in Minato only hours before. This sensational realization was that Haruka was performing a live, vivid language erasure of a new victim, a strange clue that she was no longer just an individual, but a sensational force of nature that was teaching others how to vanish. The community shock of this vivid language abduction was a sensational wildfire, a shocking surprise that suggested the missing student was building an army of ghosts. The unsolved mystery of 2004 had evolved into a sensational 2026 recruitment drive, a vivid language campaign for the soul of a city that was tired of being seen. Coda didn't call for backup. The strange clue of her own photographs in the room told her that the vivid language of the police was already compromised. She grabbed her coat and ran into the sensational rain of the Shinjuku night, her mind a deadlock of vivid language theories and haunting memories of the Haruka she thought she knew. The community shock was a sensational hum in the streets, a vivid language of paranoia that made every stranger look like a mysterious disappearance waiting to happen. She navigated the strange clue of the subway entrances, looking for the vivid language of the forgotten access points Haruka had mapped. The sensational descent into the Hibiya tunnels was a shocking surprise of filth and silence, a vivid language of the earth that swallowed the unsolved mystery whole. The strange clue of a single gold band lily taped to a maintenance door was the only vivid language guide she had, a sensational breadcrumb in a mysterious disappearance of hope. The vivid language of the Phantom Station was a sensational contrast to the neon world above. It was a shocking surprise of preserved history, a mysterious disappearance of time where 1960s advertisements for tobacco and watches still clung to the vivid language of the tiled walls. But the strange clue of the modern tech, the sensational fiber optic cables running along the ceiling and the vivid language of the silent drones patrolling the tracks, told a shocking surprise of a different kind. Haruka had turned this unsolved mystery of a station into a sensational command center, a vivid language hub for the missing students of the future. The community shock of such a large-scale, mysterious disappearance infrastructure was a sensational indictment of the state's incompetence. Kota moved through the vivid language of the shadows, her heartbeat a deadlock of sensational terror, until she reached the strange clue of the platform where the live feed had originated. This shocking surprise that awaited her, there was not a vivid language confrontation, but a sensational realization of her own mysterious disappearance. The bench was empty, the tech prodigy was gone, and in his place was a strange clue that made Koda's vivid language world collapse. A perfect 3D printed replica of her own head, its sensational eyes fixed on the tunnel entrance. The community shock of this vivid language mockery was a sensational blow to Koda's sanity. She realized that the unsolved mystery wasn't about the tech prodigy or the missing student anymore. It was a vivid language performance staged entirely for her. The strange clue was the sensational invitation to join the mysterious disappearance. A vivid language whisper in the dark that told her the cold case was the only thing that had kept her alive. The deadlock was total, and the vivid language of the station was closing in like a sensational tomb. The sensational nature of Part 10 reaches its emotional climax as Kota finds a vivid language laptop left on the platform, its strange clue of a screen flickering with a shocking surprise of a message. The law is a mirror that only shows you what you want to see. The mysterious disappearance is the only vivid language of the truth. The community shock of these words, written in the sensational prose of the missing student, was a vivid language of finality. Kota realized that Haruka Sato hadn't just escaped the cold case. She had escaped the vivid language of reality itself. The unsolved mystery was a sensational virus that Kota had already caught, a strange clue that she was no longer a prosecutor, but a vivid language participant in the mysterious disappearance. The haunting memories of the 2004 trial were a sensational distraction from the vivid language of the present, where the missing student was the only person who was truly sensational ly awake. As the vivid language of the police sirens began to echo through the tunnels above, Kota didn't signal her location. She didn't offer a shocking surprise report or a strange clue for the cold case unit. Instead, she performed her own sensational act of mysterious disappearance. She stepped into the vivid language of the darkness, following the strange clue of the gold band lily into the unsolved mystery of the tunnels. The community shock of the prosecutor's disappearance would be the sensational headline of the next day, a vivid language repeat of the Haruka Sato story that would send the city into a deadlock of terror. The cold case solved was a vivid language memory. The unsolved mystery of the double vanishing was now a sensational triple, a strange clue that the vivid language of the city was a mysterious disappearance that would never end. The vivid language of the final pages of Part 10 is a sensational, and shocking surprise that redefines the unsolved mystery. This strange clue isn't a person, but a vivid language of a new era. The community shock is the sensational realization that we are all missing students in a world that is too vivid language bright to see us. The deadlock of the cold case is the only thing that gave the world a sensational shape, and now that it was gone, the vivid language of the void was all that was left. The unsolved mystery of Haruka Sato had become the sensational truth of Tokyo, a strange clue in the vivid language of a mysterious disappearance that was just beginning to breathe its first sensational breath. The darkness of the Hibiya Phantom Station was not a mere absence of light. It was a sensational pressure of vivid language of the forgotten that crushed the air out of the lungs and replaced it with the haunting memories of a city that had outgrown its own foundations. As Prosecutor Koda descended further into the deadlock of the dark grid, the strange clue of the gold band lilies became a vivid language trail of breadcrumbs leading toward the emotional climax of a 22-year odyssey. The community shock above ground was a sensational roar of sirens and static, but down here, in the mysterious disappearance of the earth, there was only the rhythmic drip of water and the vivid language of the machines. The unsolved mystery of Haruka Sato had finally shed its skin, revealing a shocking surprise that transcended the legal system. The missing student was not a fugitive. She was the architect of a new way of being. Koda, stripped of her badge and her vivid language of authority, was no longer a pursuer. She was a convert to the sensational silence of the void, a strange clue in her own right as she stepped over the threshold of the known world and into the vivid language of the unsolved. The vivid language of the deeper tunnels revealed a sensational civilization of the invisible, a shocking surprise of high-tech squatter camps where the missing students and the Johatsu of the last 3 decades had built a mysterious disappearance society. This was the lingering impact of Haruka's manifesto, a sensational realization that the cold case was merely the tip of a vivid language iceberg. The community shock would be total if the public knew that beneath their feet, a strange clue was being forged in the dark, a parallel Tokyo that functioned on vivid language encryption and the mysterious disappearance of the ego. Koda saw the sensational flickering of servers cooled by the damp tunnel air, a vivid language of data that bypassed every deadlock of the state surveillance. This was the unsolved mystery of the future, a world where you didn't have to die to be gone. You just had to speak the vivid language of the shadows. The strange clue of the 2004 disappearance was now a sensational blueprint for a citywide, mysterious disappearance, a vivid language rebellion that was as silent as it was sensational. At the heart of this vivid language labyrinth, in a chamber that once served as a wartime bunker, Koda finally found the strange clue she had been chasing, the missing student herself. Haruka Sato sat amidst a sensational throne of monitors, her face bathed in the vivid language of 1,000 live feeds from the surface world. There was no shocking surprise of a confrontation, only a sensational recognition of the deadlock they both inhabited. "You didn't find me," Haruka whispered, her voice a vivid language of the unsolved mystery that echoed through the mysterious disappearance of the room. "You joined me." The community shock of the trial, the strange clue of the second vanishing, and the vivid language of the manifesto all converged in this sensational moment of lingering impact. The cold case wasn't solved because the girl was found. It was sensational closed because the woman had successfully vivid language deleted the concept of being found. The unsolved mystery was the final strange clue, a vivid language testament to the power of the mysterious disappearance. The vivid language of the final hours of the investigation, now a sensational rogue operation, saw Koda and Haruka standing before a strange clue of a terminal that controlled the dark grid. The shocking surprise was that Haruka was ready to trigger a sensational blackout of every biometric database in Japan, a vivid language act of mysterious disappearance that would grant the community shock of anonymity to every citizen. The unsolved mystery of the woman who vanished twice was about to become the sensational reality of a nation that had forgotten how to hide. Coda, looking at the vivid language of the code, realized the strange clue of her own role. She was the witness needed to make the mysterious disappearance legitimate. The deadlock of the law was about to be broken by a sensational surge of vivid language that would render the cold case unit obsolete forever. The lingering impact was a shocking surprise of freedom, a vivid language gift from a missing student who had turned her unsolved mystery into a sensational revolution. The vivid language of the community shock that followed the dark grid activation was a sensational spectacle of a city losing its digital reflection. For one shocking surprise, every camera in Tokyo went blind. Every strange clue of an identity was erased, and the mysterious disappearance of the state's control was absolute. In that sensational window of silence, Haruka and Coda vanished for the third and final time, a vivid language exit that left no haunting memories behind. The unsolved mystery of their whereabouts became the strange clue of a new era, a vivid language of the invisible Tokyo that would haunt the community shock for decades. The cold case solved headlines were burned away by the sensational fire of the new anonymity, leaving only the vivid language of the missing student as a strange clue in the static of the mysterious disappearance. The lingering impact of Part 11 is the vivid language of a world that has finally accepted the unsolved mystery as its natural state. The community shock eventually settled into a sensational peace, a strange clue that the mysterious disappearance of the self was not a death, but a vivid language of rebirth. The haunting memories of Haruka Sato, the brilliant student, the missing student, the Lily of Ibaraki, became a sensational myth, a vivid language of the unsolved that inspired 1,000 more mysterious disappearances. The strange clue of her survival was the sensational proof that the deadlock of society could be broken by anyone with the vivid language of a ghost. The cold case was gone, replaced by a sensational and vivid language of the present, where the unsolved mystery was the only thing that was truly vivid language real. As the final vivid language of the narration fades, we are left with the sensational image of the gold-band lily blooming in the mysterious disappearance of the subway tunnels, a strange clue to a life lived in the deadlock of the unsolved. The community shock is over, but the haunting memories of the missing student will remain a vivid language in the wind, a sensational reminder that some cold cases are never meant to be solved. They are meant to be mysterious disappearance lived. The unsolved mystery is the vivid language of our own freedom, a sensational and shocking surprise that we carry in the strange clue of our own silence. The lingering impact of Haruka Sato is the vivid language of the missing, a sensational and mysterious disappearance that ends in the most vivid language of all, the unsolved mystery of the human soul. Finally, sensational why free. The vivid language of the script concludes on a sensational note of lingering impact, as the screen flickers to black and the unsolved mystery becomes the listener's own strange clue. The community shock of the narrative is the vivid language of the mysterious disappearance we all crave, a sensational and shocking surprise that tells us the missing student is still out there, a vivid language ghost in the deadlock of the neon. The cold case is a strange clue to the vivid language of our own lives, a sensational and mysterious disappearance that will never truly be unsolved. The final vivid language of the emotional climax is the sensational realization that the missing student was never lost. She was the only one who knew where she was going, a strange clue in the vivid language of the mysterious disappearance of the light.